So thank you all for being here. I know some of you, but not all of you. My name is Jury Gualandris. I'm the director of NBS since November 21 already. So it's 1 year and a half. And I'm a professor of operations management and sustainability at the Ivy Business School. And I was supposed to give some opening remarks and set up the stage for this meeting as well as the event in June. So I'm going to talk through what we have been thinking with Jason and the NBS and MIT teams in the past few months. So essentially, what we have been thinking is that we are living a very delicate moment where there is at least several attempts to transition the world to a different place, hopefully a better place. And we are hopefully reaching a tipping point. We are tipping away from a place where we were exploiting resources and creating injustices around the world to a place that is much more balanced, equal, just, and hopefully in harmony with nature. We also know that within the broader SCC, the Sustainability Center community, many of us are engaged in different research and teaching activities that could potentially accelerate and catalyze this transition. Oftentimes, though, we are so busy doing that we forget about learning, connecting with others and learning from others. And so the idea of this system workshop would be to bring together centers, create a system map of all the projects that we are doing on the research and teaching and outreach side of things, and see for both weak and strong connection between projects so that we can share notes, create mechanisms of learning, and even potentially work towards collaboration. So essentially what we are going to do today and what we are going to do throughout the June event is to create a large system map that allows us to list, but also cluster different type of projects and seek connections between centers such that we can continue to contribute to the transition perhaps more effectively, and also maybe avoiding some duplication that always happen. I also want to highlight that this is not a one-off. We will like to then start with this event, continue in June, and then create some programming associated with that, such that NBS can facilitate these connections to work towards something bigger in the years to come. So with that being said, I will pass the floor to Jason that will do an introduction on systems change, and then we'll have a moment of breakout work in different groups. We will be randomly allocated to groups, and then we'll come back in a plenary. We'll be seeing the full map and start to create broader connections.
Great,
Jason.
Thanks, Yuri. So yeah, I'm really excited about this topic. I think if I step way back, I feel like my thinking about this topic probably started when I went to a climate, well, I don't know, I've been thinking about system change for a long time, but in its most recent incarnation, I went to a climate protest, the big ones in September 2019, and someone was carrying a sign that said, "Systems change, not climate change." And it was kind of a reminder of that, sort of actually what I had originally come to MIT for, and thinking about, okay, so much of what we do is, training students to go work in companies to be kind of incremental change agents toward incremental improvements in single company efforts, right? Or to be entrepreneurs to create single solutions to single problems with a kind of point solution approach. And I think that when we step back and we think about the big challenges that we have to solve, anything represented by the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the Donut Economics Framework, any one of those things is a systems change. It's something that requires something much, much more substantial, much more ambitious, and much more multi-stakeholder, multivocal. And so then, the question is, well, how do we mobilize systems change, and what does that look like? And I will say, it was really interesting this year. For the first time in January, I went to Davos for the World Economic Forum, the hullabaloo. I wasn't a white badge like in the center thing. I was just going to like the partner inside events. But what was really fascinating was that the world, that's also where the world is. Like the conversation was really starting to be about systems change. And you see it in everywhere from Deloitte and Rocky Mountain Institute's partnership around this, World Resources Institute, WRI has a major effort on systems change and rapid transition. It's starting to become kind of part of the rhetoric. And in parallel with that, the work that I've been doing around impact investing and family offices here at MIT Sloan, I was starting to hear more and more family offices who have flexible capital to deploy are thinking about this question of systems change and how do we use a combination of philanthropy and investing and shareholder engagement and policy engagement to try to drive systems change. So that's an active arena of research for us here at MIT Sloan, is about systems change investing, but understanding that to be within a larger conversation about systems change. And recently, Deloitte and Rocky Mountain Institute started to release some of their thinking about this. And one thing they did was this kind of table that laid out sort of the roles for different institutions in society in trying to drive toward rapid climate transition, rapid systems change on equity and sustainability issues. And one of the things that struck with so there is a row there for financial sector and investors, and that sort of plays into this other work that we're doing. But there isn't a row in that table for higher education or for business schools. And yet we know from our community that people are engaging on these topics and are working to leverage our platforms as management schools to convene, to educate, to research, to engage, to try to drive systems change in the ways that we might have access to. And so the invitation here is to explore what our role might be in those bigger processes of transition. And so what we're going to do today is sort of a preview or a mini micro version of what we're going to do in a full day on the Thursday of the big week where UN Prime and NBS and others are getting together in New York. And we're going to do this interactively. We're going to workshop this. We're going to share our own projects that we're all have afoot around systems change. And we're going to do that through a Miro board, which I'm going to share screen and sort of give a little bit of a preview of that. To start, so let me just share a screen and get that up here, and then make sure that I have my windows so I can still see all of your faces and chat. Okay, great. So the first thing is I want to just kind of level set with some language and some frameworks that might just help organize our thinking a little bit without too heavy of a kind of intellectual dose of this. The first is that and this is something that emerged out of our research on systems change investing, is that each project that you're involved with might have different system boundaries. And of course, a systems perspective, systems thinking is all about understanding the interconnectedness of everything and the unity of everything in some sense, right? And it's also the case that in order to take something on as a collective, you often need to define some kind of system boundary within which you're operating, understanding the connectivity to other things. So what we noticed in these investing efforts, and I think my hypothesis is that this applies to our efforts in business schools as well, is that there are issue-specific and issue-general efforts. So it's specific meaning targeting one or two sustainable development goals with maybe others as byproducts, versus those that are really general or issue agnostic. And then on geography, people can have kind of a more local or national, regional, or global emphasis to their work. So in the upper left quadrant here of kind of local issue-specific things, you might have a project that's aiming to change the system of food production in Hawaii. Or slightly wider, thinking at a country level, the education system in Mexico, or ending food waste in the United States, as one of the example case studies we've been looking at in the investing space. But you might also look globally at an issue-specific thing. So for example, consumer goods circular economy. So you're tackling a value chain that might cover multiple different countries, but you're looking at trying to reduce waste in that larger system. Or you're trying to drive toward decarbonization of the economy or to a variety of economies through some kind of a intervention. And then there's the issue general things where at the region specific, it looks like taking a place and saying, we're going to try to make this a regenerative, equitable place. So there's a project called Regen Melbourne, for example, which is one of the case studies in our project, where they take the whole donut economics framework from Kate Rayworth and say, okay, if we apply this, we build a big multi-stakeholder coalition, we apply this in our city, and we say, what would it look like to create a thriving, equitable, sustainable, regenerative city? Or you could do that in a region like the Alpine region of Europe, or you could kind of go in this lower right quadrant where we're being issue general and geography agnostic. And so, you know, they were sort of working on what I'll call the infrastructures of capitalism, or the infrastructure, you know, kind of broader systems change, right? So thinking about things like if we wanted to change how shareholder voting works so that we could put more values, more human values into the process of corporate governance, that would be something that it might end up being more regional if you had to do it within a particular like US jurisdiction. But, and what we want to do is sort of validate and say that any of these quadrants is okay. And the projects that you're involved with may find yourself anywhere in this picture, and that's all good. In the sense, systems change actually requires multi-level, multi-issue systems change. And so everyone working on their individual efforts, you know, ideally in conversation with one another through forums like this. So that's one sort of level set to just get you thinking about, wait, what am I doing that might fit the bill here? The second thing that is becoming increasingly used in this space is this framework from Giels et al. Thinking about system innovation and transition to sustainability, which is just noticing that this is called the Three Horizons framework. There are, you know, there are some kinds of systems change which are more incremental, that are more about optimizing the system in its current form. So, for example, reducing food waste from the existing, you know, supply chains of the food and ag delivery system. There's partial system redesign. So, for example, you know, where you're kind of putting new structures and systems in place, which may change behavior in a more substantial way. You know, like, for example, creating new channels for food waste into secondary markets. And then there's system change or transformation, which is trying to actually create kind of an entirely new architecture. So, you know, having, you know, staying with the food waste example, you know, completely changing the way that we buy food so that it's supply driven based on seasonality and locality rather than, you know, people being able to buy strawberries in January, whenever, you know, wherever they want. So that is another thing that you can think about. And again, it's totally okay for you to be at any of these levels. It's not that, you know, this kind of transformative change is better. There's just different kinds of intentionality that people have around changing the systems in these particular quadrants. And then the last thing is framework that might be useful here is these 6 conditions of systems change, which is just an effort to kind of define, when you are working on systems change, what are the kinds of interventions that you might make? So policies, practices, resource flows are in this kind of structural change, relationships and connections and power dynamics, which are in this relational change layer, or mental models, out of which everything arises. Some of you may be familiar with Donella Meadows' identification of different leverage points, and she talks about, you know, shifting paradigms or the ability to transcend paradigms as being a particularly high leverage type of work. And that sort of gets at this idea of mental models. You know, again, I'm not saying that like one or these are better or worse. I think the inquiry here is, you know, where do we as leaders in management education might have the ability to, you know, influence these different conditions for systems change. So that's just so these frameworks will be here on this Miro board as you are working in here, so that you have them as reference points and in case they help to organize your thinking. The next thing that we have on the Miro board here is and by the way, let me go ahead and just put the link here in the chat so that everybody can start popping in here. In theory, everybody should have access with the way I've set up this board, but if I made a mistake, then you'll let me know. So then what we've done is we have these kind of fields for different projects. So we have, I think, 20, if I zoom way out, we have, 16 different boxes in case every single person who came to this workshop has a systems change project that you'd like to share and work on, which is great. And then within each project, we have kind of like a little template, which is you have these sticky notes and you can, Command D or Control D will duplicate these. So if you want to make a copy of them in case you have like multiple things you want to say about it, but capturing again, according, by that first framework, like what are the SDGs you're trying to improve on, in what geographies, who are some of the stakeholders that you may have engaged, what are some of the inquiry methods that you've used to try to understand the system? There's different approaches to system mapping or modeling and so on, and research, which, wide open. And then what are some of the activities that are being undertaken to try to intervene or to drive systems change along the lines of these, the 6 conditions of change framework? And then any other notes. So this is just like your own little mini post-it board that you can use to describe and capture your project as you're sharing in the small groups. And what we'll do is we're going to try to have enough staff in the rooms so that we will help you scribe on the Miro board. But anybody should feel free to put your hands on this and kind of edit as you go. But we'll have a staff person in each of the breakout rooms to help kind of do a little bit of knowledge capture and help to get the conversation into the Miro board. And Maya says, this could be a research, teaching, and outreach project. Absolutely. So I think the way that we want to think about this is that, first of all, we don't know anything about this process, right? The role of business schools in systems change is not, in systems change sort of a sustainable world is not something that's been studied. So we don't have any retrospective guidance on this. But what we can say is that, it's probably the case that if we're going to do systems change, we're going to need to use all of our resources that are at our disposal. So that means educating. So how, through education, might we be engaging in shifting mental models or policies, if we're able to directly engage with policymakers or something like that? Through our research, how are we studying and understanding maybe historical processes of system change, or maybe those that are afoot currently, or maybe helping to identify the efficacy of different options for intervention. There's a variety of ways that research might be able to play a role here. And then certainly outreach and engagement. I mean, in some ways, that is the definition here, right? Is that we're thinking about things that are to some degree outward facing. So this isn't, it's totally legit for you to be thinking about, an internally facing thing like management education as a system change. Our own business school as a system that needs changing is a legit topic here. And I think a lot of the examples that have come up in the pre-survey that we did are more externally facing and saying, like, how can we mobilize and marshal our resources to be able to drive systems change? Okay, so what we're going to do when we go into the breakout rooms is that we're going to have 4 groups. So that means it'll be 3 to 4 people in each group, mostly 4s. And what we're going to do is I'll put the sort of what we'd like to do is have each person share, so kind of hear once from each person before getting into all conversation. So allow each person to share what's your current state of play in this domain. Do you have projects that are afoot? Are you just curious? Do you have something that's on the back burner that you're hoping to get going? So just hear once from each person to kind of check in around this topic and how do you relate to it, and what is it, what is your own work or effort here? And if you identify, well, here's this project that we're doing, then we'll start, creating a little Miro sub little frame around it. And then as you, as you kind of get into the examples, then you can kind of get into discussion about, what are the roles of business schools and systems change. And I'll put some questions here just as provocation for you to have, in your groups. What are the roles that business schools can play in systems change? how are these imagined roles similar and different among your group? What are the similarities and differences among the examples you discussed? So these are sort of dialogue questions to get into once you've gotten a couple of possible examples into the room. Okay, so I've been talking for a while. Let me pause and see what questions folks have about the perspective here or the exercise. I've generally been seeing people nod their heads as I've been talking, so hopefully the basic terrain makes sense. But any other questions or comments before we go into the breakouts? Awesome. And it looks like people are getting are able to access the Miro board, which is great. And I think we could go ahead and open up.
It looks like Dan raised his hand.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Dan.
Hey, Jason. Yeah, just a couple of clarifying questions. First is, I'm imagining we don't want to be comprehensive about this because we all have a whole portfolio, and it could be a long list making exercise. So I wanted to know your guidance on depth versus breadth.
Thank you. That's super helpful, Dan. I appreciate it. Right, for those of you who maybe have multiple different projects afoot. So I would say a quick, let's do T-shape. So quick breadth, like, here's a quick, just we're doing this, and this. But for today, I'm going to focus on this, and then go deep on that one project. And the thing to go deep on would be something that is, I would say something where it would be valuable to be in conversation with your peers about. So one of the things that we've done here in the Miro board, you'll see we made sort of a batch of these tags, which are collaborate, learn, and resource. So what we're going to do later on in the session is if you have a resource to share that's relevant for someone else, you're going to put it on a green sticky. If you want to learn more about something and you'd like to find ways to dig in and engage, then you're going to grab one of these blue stickies. If you think that there's some collaboration or coordination of your efforts to be able to achieve your system change better together, then you'll use this teal sticky to communicate that. So my advice would be, when you go deep on one example, choose the one where it would be coolest, most valuable, most useful for you to have people putting collaborate, learn, and resource stickers on your frame. Thanks for that, Dan. Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's go to breakouts. Okay, so if we take a sec to kind of browse the Miro board here, you can see that there's a couple of different. Actually, I'll go ahead and screen share again, so we can see what came out. And folks can take your own time to kind of meander around. So one thing I would say is that there's a mix of internally facing and externally facing systems change. So there's the group that I was in was talking about transforming business schools and looking at the business school as a system, and thinking about within the context of a large university and how to think about systems change at the business school or university level, thinking about governance and breaking silos and collaborating together. Some are more externally facing, like this one. It looks like focused on climate action, engaging with decision makers, using simulation tools from the platform of a business school. So that's kind of one interesting distinction I notice here. But maybe what we could just do is, and this looks like a kind of a couple more that are externally facing. So maybe what we could do is some of the ones that where it looks like folks have pulled together and focused their attention, we can hear a little bit more detail about these, and as well as any insights or observations you had about looking across the different boards. Any just general reflections from this exercise?
Yeah, I will start. In our room, we discussed two projects, one at Duke and one at St. Gallen, and both projects had a focus on students, but from different levels of analysis. So the Duke, some of you might be familiar with the climate cap summit. They're bringing together, it has been the 5th year. Students on a yearly basis for a summit. There are different students that different organizations that belong to the SEC that contribute to that week, and then they also have a fellowship. This year they have just selected 12 students that bring with them specific projects, with a variety of goals and perspectives to be discussed and developed as part of the program. The initiative has started with a focus on some specific SDGs, but apparently is expanding. And similarly, the geographies started mostly in the US, but there is international interest. The next initiative in St. Gallen is more at the micro level. They try to work with individual students and offer them opportunities for reflection and transformative learning without hierarchies, meaning that there is no lecturer. Please guys in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no lecturer. There are on a weekly basis, there are former alumni and now experts that work in consultancy companies and other corporations to bring in their perspectives and learning in sustainability. And they're very open also to more radical views of sort of leaders that started in corporations and important consultancy companies, but then left because they believed that action wasn't strong enough or aggressive enough. And I think just emphasized that a lot of the learning is by doing. So this aspect that is really, students come together, they listen about specific topics, but then they engage in real world projects on their own. Cool. So mostly focused on using teaching as a key mechanism of change, but thinking through different dimensions of aggregation from the individual level to the more collective level.
Very cool. And as we're going through here, so I want to just encourage folks to do stuff. So this is great. So we've got a green posted here that says Heather has lots of resources on this. So that is exactly what we want to be doing now. So appreciate that. So if as we're talking about a project here and you say, wow, that's really cool, I'm really curious to learn more about that, grab one of these light blue Post-its and just drag it down there and say, just like Jason wants to know more. And if you have a resource, you can say, like you said, Heather, I have a lot of resources on this, so that you can be reached out to on this topic. If you want to put particular links or things like that, URLs and stuff into these, the notes can become links. And if you're like, wait, you know what, if we all put our heads together or our efforts together, resources together, collaborate, we could do that. You can just grab one of these. So please keep doing that as we explore and talk here.
Jason, I don't know. I don't know what sticky I would use for this, but I think the question about pedagogical innovation is an interesting one, because on one hand, I think there's an effort to try to mainstream this content in the business curriculum so that it looks like other business content, case studies, approaches, so that we fit in. We're part of the family. We're included. On the other hand, I feel like our topic both requires and benefits from really different pedagogical approaches than what happened in a lot of business classes. And so I think there's some tension about how much we aspire to be like the rest of the business school and how much we see the magic of what we do being derivative of being really pedagogically different than a lot of other things that students learn. And I kind of go back and forth on that, how to sustain credibility but do things differently. And I think we need to, because I think students often don't learn the deep lessons in the traditional ways that they learn in the business classroom. So I think that's just attention.
Yeah, no, totally. So that's really helpful. So I'm just keeping a parking lot of observations, more general observations and reflections over here on the left. That's a really good one. Let's hear from someone who was looking at something more externally facing. Let's see, maybe Crystal, do you want to say a little bit about what you're up to with this Climate Pathways project?
Sure. So the Climate Pathways project is using interactive simulations to advance the adoption of evidence-based climate policy among top decision makers. So it's a climate action SDG 13. We use a global model, global simulation, so it can be used at the global level. A lot of our work is in the United States, but a lot of it is also global. The stakeholders, top decision makers, but to define that a little bit more clearly, we're talking about, in government, these can be elected officials who are actually creating climate policy, but it can also be civil servants around them that are influential to the shaping of that policy. In business, this can be C-suite leaders who are, again, the ultimate decision makers about either internal corporate sustainability policies or climate action or external corporate political responsibility. But it could also be the members of the, sustainability team and the chief sustainability officer that are highly influential to that. And then in civil society, this is really NGO leaders who are putting out, reports and thought pieces and white papers and are lobbying and are, again, just kind of like shaping that conversation. So we use En-ROADS and C-ROADS. I put those resources there. I know a lot of you are probably already familiar with them. And what other questions are here? I already said the goal.
I'm sorry, what did you just say that we're familiar with? Which?
So En-ROADS and C-ROADS
are
the
resources. Thanks you.
Yeah, those are our interactive models that we use. Oh, and the format that we use them in is, could be one-on-one with these top decision makers. We do workshops, and then we also do sort of role play, negotiation, kind of model UN style things as well. And so it's really about taking something that began in a business school, formed in a business school, was used with business school students to teach system dynamics, and then saying, like, how do we really get this out there in the world where it can affect this systems level change, and how can we make it free and easy and available for anyone? But then also our project is really to promote it and push it among those top decision makers where we feel like we could make the most change.
This is a systems model that's accessible, that's available
for free through a web browser for anyone to use. And we have a network of how many ambassadors? 600 people around the world who are trained to facilitate with it. And how many top decision makers have we reached?
About 4,700 at this point, about 1,000 in government, over 3,000 in business, and a couple hundred in civil society top NGO leaders.
It's awesome. This is why we have an MIT.
So that's a kind of more externally facing project. It looked like there was another one over here that was kind of more externally facing on
local.
Yeah, looking at Pittsburgh. Can we hear more about this one?
Yeah, so I would say that this is our center as a system. I'm from the University of Pittsburgh Center for Sustainable Business. And I guess our motto is making everyone at work a sustainability generalist, taking that, changing the system from being, this is, our team's particular effort, to how do we make sure that everyone has that as a lens, whether it is corporate purpose and making that the way that you upskill people. So a lot of our work is with our member companies that are based in Pittsburgh, but they might be multinational, like PPG or ANSYS or our local utility companies.
Oh, great. Okay. So you, and are they, so you have companies that work with the students at this, that are connected to the center.
I'm
Correct.
confused.
And then do you get them talking to each other as an ensemble of?
Right. So yeah, and I definitely welcome your feedback on whether or not we're a new center. So I did my best to answer this question, but yeah, no, our biggest way to make the systems change is the Sustainable Business Forum. Mostly member companies attend and professors as well. There's presence. Basically what we try to do is rather than just like have a broad-based sustainability topic, we try to address like a particular role per forum. So the last one was about the customer interface directed towards like marketing leaders, so including them in the conversation. How does their role help with inspiring sustainable consumer behavior? And then what resource that we offer is that we're convener, but we also provide that academic research to help them understand how this works, bring them together so they can learn from one another and their experiences, breakout rooms, and offer things like the shift framework so that they can workshop these ideas. So I guess we kind of provide that like educational resource, apply it to this particular role, and help them see how even a marketer, for example, can you see sustainability as a lens and just be a part of.
Yes. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much, Joelle, for sharing that. One of the things that I think is a question that's kind of worth always asking is, how would we know if we were making progress, right? Like, what problem are we trying to solve? Like, what is the gap between the current state and the goal state? And that's a question, like, you can ask that question at a very, very, very micro level, right? Like, I'm trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in this process in this factory, right, in this amount of time. When we talk about systems change, sometimes that system goal and current reality gap is sort of framed a little bit more broadly or abstractly, right? In the sense like getting everyone in companies in Pittsburgh to see sustainability essential to their roles, right? So it's like a transformation of the business culture of Pittsburgh companies to integrate sustainability in a more fundamental way, right? And that's a great problem statement for systems change, right? It is it's issue general in the sense of across the different SDGs, because the way that that's going to show up, there's going to be slightly different issues that are material to each of those companies in that ecosystem, right? It's geographically specific in that you're able to sort of draw a boundary and say, like, we're going to, and it's sort of stakeholder specific, saying we're talking about businesses, we're talking about this in this region, and we're talking about, a level of shift in the mental models of how they see their work, in the resource flows, in the practices, in the policies that those companies are employing in order to, create more sustainable business practices. We're building some really, part of the way that we intervene, what I just heard you say, Joelle, is we foster relationships and connections with people by having these forums that are focused on particular things and creating connectivity to the university by connecting the researchers to those folks. And then once you start looking at it in that way, then you start to notice, a whole set of questions to ask yourself, which I think are already showing up here, right? Which is, how could we evaluate this as a systems change? Like, how would we know what kind of progress we were making? Is there some kind of dashboard that we could collectively build about the level of embedding of sustainability into these organizations?
Yeah. What are the
right?
outcomes? What are the many outcomes, and who is experiencing the outcomes? That's part of the unexpected.
Yeah.
Love this. Thank you.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like asking myself this question has me evaluate the scope of it. If you do have such a broad scope, can you properly evaluate the outcome? But it definitely stimulates a lot of questions. Thank you.
One thing that we notice is that as we have a couple of projects that are, I think, issue agnostic, but geographically specific. So for example, we noticed that one of the reasons why the agri-food system is not going to change much, or is not expected to change much in the next 10 years, is because of fragmentation and polarization within the sector, such that there is the regenerative movement for certain farmers, but then there are also the traditional farming practices that are large scale, and as they start to engage with each other, they sort of fall apart and don't listen, and therefore fragmentation leads to rigidity that prevents new belief system, new mental models to be reviewed and revised and sort of adopted, that then drive new practices on the field that then drive better water, lower carbon, and more biodiversity. So we are doing something that is geographically specific, because we are focusing on the Carolinian area in Southwest Ontario, which is one of the richest area from a biodiversity standpoint, but is also the most exploited, given that Canada mental model is to feed the world with proteins, which, as you can see, as you embrace that principle, very difficult to be sustainable on the ground, right? So we are now targeting different counties in the Southwest Ontario and just enabling a peer-to-peer learning and engagement process between farmers that come from different, not different geography, from the same geography, but from different social cultural groups, like indigenous groups, more white groups, more traditional farmer, more regenerative farmer, more organic farmer, to discuss together their different belief systems. And as we were thinking about, okay, how do we measure whether we are successful or not? We realized that just the task about thinking what outcome metrics we use was very, very eye-opening for us in terms of what should we be doing to potentially influence those outcome metrics, acknowledging that is going to be very difficult to capture some of those outcomes. Like the measurement part of it is very, very difficult. But it was just in itself a useful exercise to help with the design of what we were doing.
Yep. So kind of the talking about measurements is cool, right? And then measuring, dashboarding, is key. So I think that's a really great observation. So as you have kind of been in this conversation, been listening to us, what are some of the questions or puzzles or challenges or barriers that are coming up in your mind that we can sort of pose and sit with together as a group here? What are some of the things that come up for each of you? Actually, why don't we do this in the chat? Let's stay in Miro. So if everyone who's on the Miro could come over here to where I am, which is this observations board on the left side. Thank you, Abby. And you can click the little post-it button here and create a new sticky note and use it to pose some kind of a question or a puzzle that's on your mind about this terrain of systems change and capture it here on the board. I'm finding, as I said, nobody knows how to do this. There should always be more questions than answers, but sitting with the questions sometimes leads the answers to emerge.
Okay, and just tell us one more time how to generate sticky notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you should see on the left side this little toolbar. And this thing is a sticky note. If you click that sort of turns on, you can like choose your color. You can choose whatever color you like. And I'm in a pink mood today. And then your cursor turns into a little sticky, and then wherever you click, boom, your sticky appears. If you can also shortcut that first step just by pushing N. You can see N shows up here. That's I hit N, that makes a sticky note, turns my cursor into a sticky note maker. And then you can type anything you'd like.
And what's our tasks?
What question is on your mind about systems change from a business school perspective?
Oh, I just realized I'm trying to do this on the Zoom screen.
Oh, on my shared screen. Yeah, sorry. if I stop share here, and then I'll force everybody to have your own control over your own Miro screen.
I don't know if Jason, this is a bias that we introduced because of the setup, but there is a lot of on goal settings and tensions between established goals and needed actions.
Mm-hmm.
You can see a big cluster happening.
Yep. One of them that's standing out for me also is this question about like, what if you don't naturally think in terms of systems? You know they're important, you want to think in terms of them, it doesn't happen that naturally. Like, what is the how do we build systems thinking capacity in this whole extended community and everywhere, right? I think that's a really I think that's a really interesting question. It's one that I found I totally was taking for granted. And I would be curious, maybe for folks could like add little tag, like other little post-it notes next to that one, say like, what has been useful for you? Like if you have had moments of greater enhancement of your systems thinking skills, or you've seen that happen for other people, what has been valuable in that? That's a great thing for us to share resources around and use as a starting point as we build this community.
Jason, where is that?
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna change the color of it to purple. It's an Abby's got her pointer over it. But yeah, yeah, great. I'm actually, maybe we'll pull, yeah, and I'll pull folks can add, we'll clean things up a little later. But people are sharing links. Beautiful, awesome.
Mine are so much bigger. It's funny, I'm out of you're so much at a smaller dimension than me. Isn't that interesting?
You can zoom in and out with 2 fingers on your.
Yeah, I'm with you. Oh, I haven't even read these yet. Jeez.
And you mean, I like the notion that we're part of a movement. Are we part of a movement?
Mm-hmm. We have to be. We have to be.
I think that's fundamental to me. If we all got that we're all part of the same movement,
I love that.
then there's already 60% that are already moving in this direction, but we're all moving in what? Different directions. What is the direction? Well, it's all the same thing. Who says, according to which? But if you let go of that and look at what we want, I think it's all there. It just needs to be like ready, set, go. Humble opinion.
One thing that came out around this theme of building community, building movement, building coordination, there was something that came out in our small group where it was like each of the different, centers is fine, right? Each of the different faculty are fine. Each of our different efforts are fine. Like that's a mental model that is actually very good collaboration, because it says like, unless people understand the sort of, the missed opportunities, or have a more burning platform of like, we're really just not going to we're just not going to succeed unless we think bigger together. I think that's a really important piece of this. And I think we all have to sort of notice the degree to which we think we have that thought, like, well we're fine. Like,
yeah, well, there's a non-burning platform that just emerged in my mind. if you think about Boston Metro, what if universities could speak, right? What if I could say, here's what we're working on, just as you could say at MIT and Babson and Harvard and Suffolk and out to UMass Amherst. I bet we could, that's not interesting. It's just a single thought.
We are getting toward the end of our time, and so this is fantastic. The questions that are emerging here, I think I was at a meeting recently and someone said that in a systems thinking approach includes the perspective of emergence, and that one of the critical disciplines in this space is to sit with the questions and live the answers.
Who said
this was a woman who leads a transformative effort in Tangier in Morocco.
Wow. Yeah.
And sit with the questions and live the answers. So that's sort of the invitation here with the set of questions that are emerging here. And we're going to dig further into these questions, as Yuri said, when we get together in person in New York in June. Yuri, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah. I just want to say that it was very eye-opening. I was expecting a lot, but certainly what happened, it's beyond what I expected. So we overachieved. I also want to say that NBS will remain committed to sustain that social movement, collective movement that we have been talking about here. So the June event is not the destination, is the start of the journey, and we will hope. Essentially, what we are trying to do is we have a great website where you can find lots of resources, but we're going to go beyond that to create community engagement through initiatives such as the one that we have seen today, the cafes that happened in the past 6 months, and going forward, additional activities that will be designed to catalyze some of the content that we have seen emerging in the Miro board today. So thank you to all of you for being here, investing your time and effort. It will be great to see you in June.